William James once said, in any project, the most important factor is your belief. Without belief, there can be no successful outcome. Dr. Jack Kevorkian believes and believes and believes in every terminal patient's right to physician-assisted suicide. He famously said that dying is not a crime. Passion and purpose go hand in hand. When you discover your purpose, you will normally find it's something you're tremendously passionate about. And that is the simple reason why Jeffrey Feiger became the lawyer for Dr. Jack Kevorkian. Jeff was, and still is, an advocate for Jack. Both Jack and Jeff forced us to pay attention to one of the biggest elephants in society's living room, the fact that today vast numbers of people are alive who would rather be dead, who have lives not worth living. On November 22nd, 1998, 60 Minutes broadcast a videotape that Jack Kevorkian made on September 17th, 1998, which showed the voluntary euthanasia of Thomas Uke, an adult male of sound mind who was in the final stages of ALS. After Uke provided his fully informed consent on September 17, 1998, Kevorkian himself administered a lethal injection. During the videotape, Kevorkian dared the authorities to try to convict him or stop him from carrying out assisted suicide. This incited the prosecuting attorney to bring murder charges against Kevorkian, claiming he had single-handedly caused the death. On March 26, 1999, Kevorkian was charged with first-degree homicide and the delivery of a controlled substance. Kevorkian was found guilty of second-degree homicide, and the judge sentenced him to a 10 to 25-year prison sentence. Kevorkian was denied parole repeatedly. In an MSNBC interview aired on September 29, 2005, Kevorkian said that if he were granted parole, he would not resume directly helping people die and would restrict himself to campaigning to have the law changed. Terminally ill with hepatitis C, which he contracted while doing research on blood transfusions in Vietnam, Kevorkian was expected to die within a year in May 2006. He was paroled on June 1, 2007. He spent 8 years and 2.5 months behind bars rather than the predicted 10 to 25 years. Kevorkian was on parole for 2 years, and one of the conditions he had to live with was he could not help anybody else die. He was also prohibited from providing care for anyone who is older than 62 or was disabled. Kevorkian said he would abstain from assisting any more terminal patients with death, and his role in the matter would strictly be to persuade states to change their laws on assisted suicide. He was also forbidden by the rules of his parole from commenting about assisted suicide. On June 4, 2007, Kevorkian appeared on CNN's Larry King Live to discuss his time in prison and his future plans. At the time of Kevorkian's release, the only state in the United States that had legalized doctor-assisted suicide for terminally ill patients was Oregon. Today, the Insider Exclusive will go behind the headlines as we visit with Dr. Jack Kevorkian's lawyer, his former trial lawyer, Jeffrey Feiger, and his current lawyer, Mayor Morgenroth. Also, we will visit with well-known journalist Jack Lessenberry, who's written extensively on Dr. Kevorkian. The Insider Exclusive will examine politics and the law, physician-assisted suicide as medical science, and how the media affects passions, advocacies, and justice. Hi, I'm Steve Murphy, and this is the Insider Exclusive, live from the Feiger Law Firm in Detroit, Michigan. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Jeff Feiger. Welcome to the show.
Good to see you again.
You know more about Dr. Kevorkian than most people who are living today because you represented him in 6 murder cases. What would you want our audience to know about Dr. Kevorkian that they didn't read in the newspaper or they didn't get from some other place?
Well, they would never get that he's genuinely a good guy, that he's a great conversationalist, that he is very interested in people. He enjoys meeting people and talking to them. He's kind. He's very old-fashioned. He doesn't swear. He doesn't basically drink. I think I got him to drink a glass of Mogan David once, but and he's pleasant and fun to be around. The idea that he's obsessed with death or morose or somehow ghoulish is absurd. He's just a brilliant guy who is involved in that issue, the right to die or the right to make choices at the end of your life. But he's not obsessed with it in the manner in which people think he is. He's a much more well-rounded individual. He's strident. He's a zealot. I don't want to give the direction on that, but he is certainly a very kind and nice person.
How did you come to represent Jack?
Well, an interesting thing happened. It was actually by accident. I'm not sure he would have picked up the phone. Actually, Margot called me, his sister, who's since passed away. Perhaps if I wouldn't have picked up the phone on a hot Sunday afternoon in August of 1990 or 91, I can't remember which year, it would have never come to pass. But I happened to be here in my office on an afternoon. My wife and I had gone to a charity event quite near here, and it was outside, and it was unbearably hot. And the phone rang, and I don't know why I picked it up, because we have an answering machine and an answering service. But I did, and it was Margot. And Margot said, "I'm Jack's sister." And I'd known who they were because he had recently helped Janet Adkins, and there was a huge cloud building to convict or imprison or do something bad to the doctor who had helped a lady die in a park in Oakland County. So I told him, "That's interesting, come on over." And they did. Margot in her house coat and wig, Jack in his blue sweater, he was wearing it, with his fisherman's hat, even though it was hot. They looked like a little Armenian couple, even though they're brother and sister. And we spoke about the case, and they went home and they thought about it. They asked me, they were very concerned with how much I was going to charge them. And I asked Jack how much money he had in his pocket. I was kidding, actually. And they apparently had gone home and talked about it, and
right.
Then they called me back that same day and said, "Oh yes, you'll be the person who represents Jack." Of course, they had gone to many other lawyers who wanted money,
yeah,
or who were scared to death for fear of what would happen to their practice or their careers. So they were kind of in a bind, but it was Margot who prevailed on Jack. If Jack had had his way, I would never have been his attorney, because Jack has no common sense. He would have picked probably somebody who would have gotten him convicted immediately.
Yeah. You know, when you talk about your relationship with Jack, he wasn't your typical client, was he?
No, I became much closer to Jack. In that way, and I'm sure that communicated to the jury,
yeah,
that he was my friend, that I loved him and that I cared about him, and that in order to get Jack, they would have to come through me and kill me with an axe first.
But he
that sort of attachment, that sort of commitment to your client is communicated, because remember, as a trial attorney, the real connection to your client, although they build a connection with your client, is through the attorney and by the attorney. Mm-hmm. Because the attorney can help the client, and he can certainly, or she can certainly, hurt a client too by not making a connection with the jury.
Now, you represented him in 6 murder trials.
No, more than that.
More
there
than
was
that?
8 murder trials. 6 actually went to verdict. 1 was dismissed, the Janet Adkins, in the preliminary exam. 1 was dismissed in Ionia. The last one that I represented Jack before I ran for governor, that was dismissed after the opening statement and a mistrial, and they chose never to try Jack again. There was actually 1 more case, too. It was a coroner's inquest in Macomb County. I don't remember the name of the patient. I think it was Hugh Gale. So there was actually, if you consider it all, the potential we faced, it was 9 murder trials. But only 6 it came to verdict. 3 I got dismissed in other ways.
What was your legal strategy in each one of these cases?
To win.
But how? How were you going to convince that jury of 12?
Well, remember, what you have to understand as a trial attorney, and what I learned, and it's a learning process that I'm still going on, it's also that you have to believe what you're saying. You can't it's not a strategy where you come up with some Machiavellian plan and you're going to lead the jury here, there, and everywhere. That doesn't happen. And you've got to communicate your commitment to your client and the belief of what you're saying. But it wasn't a legal strategy. It was a human strategy. The human strategy was, one, that how did anyone get murdered, because he was charged with first-degree murder, when they had ended their own lives with their own hands, and that they had chosen it in the face of terrible, terrible suffering. I mean the patients. It wasn't Dr. Kevorkian's choice. He wasn't some Svengali who convinced them to do something that shouldn't have been done, and that was one of the things that prosecutors tried to say, and it was absurd. Yes. Because every family member would come on the stand and describe the sickness, and we could verify. Jack went through an assiduous and arduous process of qualifying these patients. And finally, we had the patients themselves. They spoke to the jury through the videotape interviews that Jack had done. In that way, I was really communicating to the jury an issue that they themselves, unless they had been living in a closet somewhere, will or had been involved with in their lives. Each one of them had or would in some day, unfortunately, have to deal with these end-of-life issues, because we all have had parents or relatives or, God forbid, even spouses, or some of us even children, who have died and died terribly. And so the issue was not with children and not with mentally incompetent people. The issue was whether grown adults, Americans in America, have the right to be treated as well as our pets. Because we say when we end our pets' lives in the face of suffering that that's beneficent, that that's moral.
Right.
But we tell our own people, you can't do that to yourself? What are we? I mean, how cruel could that be?
Right. How do you use the media, not only in this case, but in other cases, to help you get that message across?
Well, you can use the media or they can use you. The media, you're a expendable, me and my client, my cause, my case is an expendable commodity with the media. Okay, they cover my case, but they only cover my case and my client's case, so they can broadcast it on TV and get the biggest audience. Okay, so one, I understand, first of all, how to make things interesting, how to tell a story. I understand I'm good at that. So I'm camera savvy in that regard, which is different than most lawyers. And it can't be learned. It's either there or it's not there. If you try to do it, if you try to learn it, you won't be able to do it. So I understand that intuitively. I don't know why. And then the choice is, are you going to let the media control you and use you as the commodity, or are you going to do your best to communicate through the media your story? And I tried to do that. Now, that's a constant battle, let me say. The media doesn't necessarily say, okay, Jeff, you just tell this story any way you want. They fight you every step of the way. But that was okay. When you have a story they want, then you can manipulate it. The biggest mistake, quite honestly, some lawyers make is they think they're me, or they think they know what they're doing. They think they know how to control the media, and they really don't. In that sense, they can get really hurt. They can get their clients in a lot of trouble. It's much better to shut up. Yeah. And probably in retrospect, in some of my cases, it might have been better for me to shut up too.
As a result of the publicity of this case and your close association with Dr. Kevorkian, you must have been contacted by others who were in similar situations, possibly being prosecuted for helping people terminate a close loved one's life. What if you had a case like that today? Would you take it?
I would. I've been contacted, but I've never been contacted by a physician or an attorney where the case closely paralleled Dr. Kevorkian.
Yes.
There was a tangent in many of the cases which was very similar in some way, shape, or form, but also, when I dug more deeply into it, there was an element of self-interest in the cases that I was presented with. Kevorkian was altruistic in that sense. He had no self-interest. There was no self-aggrandizement. He wasn't promoting himself. He wasn't getting rich. He wasn't taking advantage of anyone. In every other, and I've been contacted through the years, in every other case there was an element that maybe the physician, the person involved, shouldn't have been involved.
Yes.
There was something that wasn't absolutely pure about it, and I didn't need to get involved. I'm not going to make my life expertise, defending physicians or people who are insisting in suicide. That's going to be a rare occurrence. Kevorkian is a one-in-a-lifetime fact, because he was the right person at the right time on the right issue. Period.
With this, your close association with this issue and other issues that you've been intimately involved with, how has that strengthened you as an advocate for other causes? How's it changed you?
Well, first of all, I've been under attack for so long, and I've had to take so many slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. It's hardened me.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully it's made me more wise, because a lot of the problems that I've faced are of my own doing, by putting myself so much out there.
Yeah.
So out there that, believe me, I have had and continue to have lawyers and judges and authorities look for ways to get me. Now, that's not to make yourself a target. In every case, I make myself a target in the sense that they've got to come through me to get to my client. They've got to cut me up with an axe in order to get to my client.
Yeah.
But to make yourself a constant target out there is, in some ways, I've learned, very self-destructive.
Yeah.
And it's something that shouldn't be. I would advise others in my position, or potentially in my position, to be more wise than I was.
We have a writer on the show today who's written extensively about you, as well as Jack Kevorkian. I'm going to introduce him, Jack Lessenberry.
Yes, by the way, who has chronicled the Kevorkian saga more thoroughly than any other writer in America.
I want to welcome Jack Lessenberry to the show. Welcome to the show, Jack.
Thank you.
Speaking about the Kevorkian article that you wrote about, you know this man very well. In your estimation, what would you say his mission, how does his mission compare to doctors who every day with their families agree to not pursue, life support for some of their family members? How does he differ from that?
Well, Dr. Kevorkian, I think, Jack Kevorkian saw this as a cause and an issue, and really, he's more a scientist than a doctor. While he had intellectual compassion, he really wasn't involved emotionally with these patients. He doesn't get involved emotionally with people. It was sort of a cause for him. Also, Kevorkian likes sticking his finger in the eye of society. Where Kevorkian and Jeffrey differ is that Kevorkian, I think, is fundamentally self-destructive, and you saw how that played out.
Yes.
But I might say this, that in one sense, the true Hippocratic sense, Kevorkian follows a more true to the oath of Hippocrates, in the sense that doctors shall do no harm. He really tries to follow that. I understand what Jack's talking about in terms of Kevorkian the man. But when you think about it, very few physicians today are altruistic. Kevorkian is truly altruistic. He never, even though he was motivated obviously by a number of things that went on in his character and his upbringing, ultimately though, he did it selflessly. He did it at great harm to himself. What I'm saying basically is he was driven by what he thought was right for the patient, not by any self-interest, not by trying to get rich, not by trying to become famous, which were all. He didn't become rich, but he did become famous, but that was a byproduct of his altruism.
Today, what is he doing? He's advocating to change state law?
Well, today he's doing a number of things. He's sort of eclectic, and he has a hard time sticking to one thing. The man's in his 80s now.
Yeah.
He's writing a book, as I understand it, on overpopulation in the world. He does a little speaking. He read,
It'll be a big seller, 3.
He ran for Congress last year, but in the middle of that got bored with it and really stopped running. So he's.
How did the vote turn out? I'm just curious.
He was third out of a 3-man race.
Well, he got 4 or 5% of the vote.
Yeah.
He didn't influence the election in any way.
No, he didn't.
Let me ask you this. In retrospect, he spent 8 years and some months or days in jail. What does he think about that time period that he was in jail?
I haven't talked to him enough to know, really.
Yeah.
Jeffrey might know.
I think there's twofold. One, he felt he would become a martyr.
Yeah.
It didn't happen like that, although with the movie, 2 movies coming out,
Yeah.
the HBO movie and the documentary, I think the rest of the world may understand the greatness of Kevorkian. He thought he would become a martyr in his own lifetime, if you will, or very shortly thereafter. That may happen, but it won't happen because he got imprisoned, but because of the movies. And I think he's a little regretful. I mean, when he was in there, he didn't like it. What he would, for instance, during the time I represented him, went on a couple hunger strikes. He'd get imprisoned because he wouldn't listen to the conditions of the parole during or the probation or whatever they called it, the bail, when he was out on bail during the first-degree murder charges. He'd say, after a few days, he'd said, "Get me out of here. I don't want to be here anymore." Well, when you get sentenced to 20 years in prison, you can't say that anymore. And he had to live with that. Now, he knows that I'm angry that he did that. I think he's a little angry at himself that he put himself in that position. And because of that, there's a slight friction there, because Jack doesn't want to talk about it with me, even though he and I both understand intuitively, because we were so close, what shouldn't have happened and what did happen.
Yeah. We're going to introduce right now Jack Kevorkian's current lawyer, Mike Morgenroth. We're going to have him on the show right now. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Thank you. Thank you.
I understand you represent Dr. Kevorkian today, right?
Yes.
When you represent him, are you representing him in a lot of his current business ventures now, or what?
Well, I represented him back in some of the trials.
Yeah.
Jeff Feiger actually brought me in at that particular time. Jeffrey had been his friend and representing him in those particular trials.
Right.
Prior to me, he brought me in. And since then, I was in the trials with Jeffrey, and then I got in the Yelp trial on the last day, which was an unfortunate event, not me getting in, but that trial.
Yeah.
And then subsequent to that, I represented him throughout his appeals, both the state and the federal, regarding his conviction, and also trying to get him out of prisons because of his illness and health. And then since he's gotten out, I've represented him in his lectures, speeches, his books that are being published, and so on and so forth.
The real, Mike is understating it, the real service he's rendered to Jack is after Jack was convicted. Jack, of course, had decided to represent himself in the last trial, and so had told me that he knew what he was doing better than I knew what I was doing.
Yeah.
And he got himself convicted. And he needed somebody. He really needed somebody to try to get him out and to give him hope, because he's a 72-year-old man going to prison for basically a life sentence, 20 years. And Mike did yeoman's work, both at the appellate levels and in the federal level, to get him out. Now, eventually, none of those appeals were successful. Really, it was Mike's prevailing on the powers that be to give him a pardon or commutation of the rest of his sentence for humanitarian purposes. But Mike was heroic in that sense for 8.5 years. That prevented Jack, I think, from losing hope, and that was really the contribution that people need to understand.
You know, a lot of Americans think, I'm going to have my day in court. I'm going to let the world know what's going on. Jack probably was of that same mind. But you'd both agree, there's a lot of political influence in the justice system today.
Well, yes, but that's primarily at the appellate court level.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's trickling down on the trial court level too. Those judges who get appointed, who really aren't qualified because they've never really tried lawsuits.
Yeah.
The entire problem that exists, though, because the day in court preconceives that you're going to have the right to go in front of a jury that you've selected or that your attorney has participated in selection. And that's the real attack that's going on right now in America, the attack on the right to trial by jury, literally.
Less and less cases are going to trial.
That's true, but when you talk about the appellate level, The appellate level for Jack was, shall we say, not just unusual, but unheard of. During his trial and the final argument, the prosecution 12 times stated he should have taken the stand. There isn't one case in existence that's not automatic reversal.
Right.
Because it's a violation of the Fifth Amendment. It's plain error. Meanwhile, the appellate courts all said he waived it. You can't waive it. It's just impossible.
Right. Different rules. What Mike is saying is, and that's true in every trial that I tried, different rules applied to him. That's why I knew in the trials that we won, unfortunately Mike had to go on appeal, that we'd never win on appeal. Our only chance was in front of juries, because if we ever went into the appellate courts, their deck would be fixed against Jack. He would never be successful. And Mike's told you, automatic reversal in his trial, saying that he should have taken the stand is like saying, commenting on the fact that he didn't take the stand, which you're not permitted to do. That is automatic reversal, but in Jack Kevorkian's case, it didn't mean anything.
If you look at the picture of the judge in Life magazine, her hands like this. That's when it was said. She knew automatically, but no objection was made. After that, it was done 11 more times. She kept going, No objection was made. But that's beside the point. It's an automatic reversal.
Before the show, I spoke to you a little bit about today, more so in America, many doctors and their families and their relatives of their loved ones make decisions every day to cut them off from life support system, basically euthanasia. Would you say this is as a result of the publicity of Dr. Jack Kevorkian and his cases?
I wouldn't say that's primarily the reason.
Yeah.
I'd say it's one of the reasons. However...
Well, wait a second, but Washington and Oregon have legalized assisted suicide.
In Washington,
in
too?
Montana.
That's directly the result of Dr. Kevorkian.
Absolutely, but he was asking a different
question.
question.
No, I know.
Montana also is legalizing it through the courts. Also, it's legalized now in the Netherlands, in Switzerland. Of course, Jack doesn't agree with most of the places the way they do it.
Then
He
how
does
do
with only
they
one.
do it?
Well, they do it where the doctor can't be in attendance, where the person does it only to themselves. The doctor brings the particular medicine.
Okay.
Let's be honest, it's done as a result of Jack also. As a reaction to Jack, not as a result, as a reaction to Jack, there was a promotion of hospice, which is wonderful. Jack's always been in favor of hospice. But when you come right down to it, hospice gives you, at the end of your life, a bag of morphine and a button that anybody can push as many times as you want.
Really?
And if you push that button enough, all you're doing is exactly what Dr. Jack Kevorkian was doing, and everyone knows it. And if you're wealthy enough in America, I don't care where you live, you can get the help. What Jack's issue was really is to let people who aren't wealthy enough get the help.
Thank you for representing Jack Kevorkian, both of you, in bringing to America's attention that some laws need to be changed. I want to thank you for being on the show, Mike.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you, Jack.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at www.insiderexclusive.tv. Thank you.